Hey, what up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. I was able to keep up with WWE's Undertaker week on the WWE Network. Last night, they aired an episode which was called Undertaker 25 Phenomenal Years. Honestly, in my mind, what this took me back to was one of the old WWF VHS tapes, which would be like an hour-long best of The Undertaker, where it just seems that they try to cover 25 years in a half an hour. There's no doubt in my mind that there's going to be a ton of stuff left out. I mean, like, this honestly wasn't that good. I mean, like, the one thing I was thinking about as I was watching this episode was I was thinking of Gemini 888, Mr. WWE DVD here on YouTube. I was thinking, what if this was a WWE DVD release, and this was sort of like a documentary on The Undertaker? What would Gemini be thinking? And I think that Gemini would honestly hit the roof. This was a very bad documentary. It wasn't even really a documentary, because it wasn't like they had sit-down interviews with him or anything like that. This was just a bad... It wasn't even the best of The Undertaker, because they say they're airing the best of The Undertaker's matches tonight on the WWE Network. So I don't know really what to call this, but if you want to know what I thought of, I thought of those old VHS tapes that used to come out throughout the year, that were sort of like little stories on, The Rock or Kurt Angle, Undertaker, Stone Cold Steve Austin, got a bunch of them. But they tried to pack his whole career into a half hour, and that was a real big, miss, because they spent a lot of time talking about the 1990 Survivor Series debut, where the $1 Million Man brought him out, and he came down in the match. They show him, causing a whole bunch of problems in that match for Dusty Rhodes. I believe it was him and Dusty fighting all the way up the ramp, and Undertaker got counted out, and that's the fact of how Undertaker lost and was not a part of the Ultimate Survival match at the end of the night, because I think if they wouldn't have done the Ultimate Survival match at the very end, where the winners of the Survivor Series matches came back for one more match, and the moment was Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior winning at the very end, that more than likely the Undertaker would have been in this match. Ted DiBiase and the $1 Million Team got the win. $1 Million Man moved on to the final survival match, teaming up with all of the members of the model team. I think the model team is the team that had the clean sweep, it was what it was. But they show him beating up Coco Beware, and they show that right from the bat, people were scared of this guy. Fans, wrestlers, nobody knew how to take this guy as being a dead guy. Really being in there. They show a lot of jobber matches, and that's really how you got to see Undertaker wrestle back in the day, was watching Wrestling Challenge or Wrestling Superstars, All-American Wrestling, where it was just Undertaker wrestling in these job matches that he just beat the piss out of people, and that got it into your mind of seeing The Undertaker win hundreds of matches in a row, as a guy that you don't want to mess with, that he can really mess people up. It didn't matter that he wasn't fighting, real competition. Back in those days, that was real competition. They made it seem as if the Undertaker came in to WWF and he immediately set sights on Hulk Hogan. It was a whole year before he got his championship shot against Hulk Hogan at Survivor Series 1991, The Gravest Challenge. And I remember as a kid being so confident that Hulk Hogan was going to win this match. I remember that my dad got me like those little things that sit on a restaurant that sits in the middle. He brought one home for me because it had a flyer on the inside to come watch the Survivor Series. So I remember seeing this advertisement, and I'd be sitting there eating my cereal, and I'd be looking at it and just be looking at it like, this is where Hogan beats the Undertaker. And I was starting to put things together that more than likely this was going to be the end of the Undertaker. Hogan would beat him. They would try to put him in another feud, and you know how things went back in the day. They ended up in WCW, and that was it. But I didn't see the 1991 Survivor Series, but I remember when I caught wind that The Undertaker won and he was the new champion. I was so confused. I didn't know what to do. they ended up doing a Tuesday in Texas, very, very fast, where I'm not 100% sure what day the pay-per-view was on. If it was on, well, I guess I do, because it had to have been on a Wednesday, because back in the day, Survivor Series used to be held on Thanksgiving Eve, the night before Thanksgiving, as the guys would gather around and watch WWF. My mom was stuffing the turkey and getting the pies ready and things like that for the next night's meal. And then they did a pay-per-view on that Tuesday, which was to get right down to business. Hulk Hogan getting the belt back from The Undertaker. One thing leads to another. The belt gets held up, and because of Ric Flair's interference, Hulk Hogan's using a chair and this, that, and the other. And that's what sets up the Royal Rumble 1992 as the winner gets the championship. Ric Flair ends up winning. Hogan gets into it with Sid, and Undertaker sort of gets left in the dust. I'm trying to remember. I guess that's WrestleMania 7. So I guess that would be Taker's. Would that be Taker's first Mania or second Mania? So I think that at that time it would be Taker versus Jake Roberts, but I'm not 100% sure. I think that makes sense, because I think as I'm seeing that match in my mind, I'm seeing the Hoosier Dome, and that would be the right one, which would be WrestleMania 8. I get those early WrestleManias mixed up, so give me a little bit of grace if I mess that up. From there, they talk about Paul Bearer coming in and managing The Undertaker with Brother Love handing over the reins. To me, honestly, I thought that Paul Bearer was there for the Hulk Hogan match, so I don't know if they just didn't talk about it before that, or if they made it where Paul Bearer came in after. But they talk about Paul Bearer being the right guy to lead The Undertaker, and then they immediately go, without even showing any highlights of Paul Bearer being the right guy at the right time, helping The Undertaker out. They immediately go to 1996, I believe it would be SummerSlam, Paul Bearer turning on Mankind, or turning on The Undertaker, joining Mankind during that backstage brawl, Broiler Room Brawl. That's what it's called, because that's where Mankind hung out with all the rats and things like that. Well, not those rats, real rats. But, and then they immediately, I think by making this jump go so fast, because, when I think about it in my history of time, the Paul Bearer turn on Undertaker in 1996, I think of it as being something that, was sort of big at the time, but when you look back on it, like, that was so stupid, because of how many times, Paul Bearer and The Undertaker were hand in hand, and they were the way, that you think about them. But, they go right to the 1997 angle, where Paul Bearer joins with Kane, telling the story of Undertaker burning down the funeral home, and he burned Kane, his brother, inside of it, who is he was an innocent victim, and Kane was coming back to make sure that Undertaker would be put to rest. And this was a huge jump in the storyline, where Undertaker, as a dead guy, had a brother, and Paul Bearer was having sex with his mom, and all sorts of things like that. It showed a different side of the Undertaker. Then they immediately go to all of the returns of The Undertaker. This is sort of what I say, like, I think to this point, it was good. But at this point is when it just completely jumped the rails. And they just show the best returns of The Undertaker, with him coming back in 2010 at the SummerSlam, jumping out of the casket, to, track down Ray, but at the last second attacking Kane, because they did the whole storyline of Undertaker was found in a, Undertaker was going to be in a vegetated state in the back, and no one knew who it was. So Kane was going around, saying that Swagger attacked him, saying that Ray attacked him, trying to get anybody to say that they were the guy that did it. And in the end, Undertaker was the one who pointed the finger at Kane, saying Kane was the one to beat him up. They showed the return of Kurt Angle, where Taker came out on a horse. They showed the return at Survivor Series with Randy Orton, and the Randy Orton one was probably the best. Randy Orton was one of the guys who sold for Undertaker better than anybody else. He just made it believable, like it was in some sort of a scary movie, that somebody was coming to kick his ass, and Randy Orton knew that there was nothing they could do. They had stacked the deck with him and his dad doing everything in the world to make sure that the Undertaker was not going to come back, and there he was. They even showed as soon as the Battleground return, at Battleground when Brock Lesnar was fighting Seth Rollins, he turns around, there's the Undertaker, he gets hit in the nuts, gets the tombstone, and that's what basically set up SummerSlam. They set up some of the best angles and the best matches that the Undertaker was ever in. They talked about Backlash 99, where Undertaker came down and he kidnapped Stephanie. And then at the next night on Monday Night Raw, went into the ring, put Stephanie on the cross, and Paul Bearer did the ceremony of trying to marry Undertaker and Stephanie McMahon, and Undertaker taking Stephanie as his bride, which brought out Stone Cold Steve Austin, which was probably, in my mind, one of the coolest Monday Night Raw moments of all time, because it had Stone Cold Steve Austin coming out to help Vince McMahon, take Stephanie to make it where she wasn't going to be married to The Undertaker. Stone Cold didn't want to help Vince because they weren't friends, but it just was the right damn thing to do. So it built a little bit more of a good guy factor to Stone Cold Steve Austin. And in the end, I think it was just Vince fucking over Stone Cold Steve Austin in the end, because then that's when they set up the corporate ministry, which in my mind was a really big jump. And I think that's when when Vince, pulled off the hood and it was me, Austin, which was a cool reveal. And then they just really didn't have anywhere to fucking go with the higher power. They talked about the Undertaker's entrances. I swear, if you've been there for an Undertaker entrance, I mean, when they turn the lights out, I don't know if they turn the AC up to 100, and they just crank out ice into that place. But honestly, when they say there's a chill in the air, when Undertaker's gong is going off and he's making his way down to the ring, it's as close to as a dead man walking down to the ring as you're going to get. They build up the Hell in the Cell as Undertaker's playground. Of course, they play the most famous Hell in the Cell match and the most famous Undertaker match, which is Undertaker versus Mankind from the Hell in the Cell, which would be King of the Ring in 1998, I believe. With Undertaker launching Mick Foley off the top of the cage. He's choke slamming Terry Funk out of his shoes. One hell of a deal there for you. But they bring up the streak with him losing after beating guys like Jake the Snake Roberts, Jimmy Snuka. He didn't beat King Kong Bundy, did he? Maybe he beat King Kong Bundy. Giant Gonzalez. A lot of the first matches were nothing really to talk about. But luckily for, when you look back and you put all those names up on banners, minus Giant Gonzalez, at least all of those guys are Hall of Famers. So it sort of means something now. But, when you look at it, where those guys, especially like Jimmy Snuka and Jake the Snake Roberts were in their careers were pretty much done when Undertaker got a hold of them. So maybe someday they'll build some storyline of trying to put together that Undertaker put them to rest, and that was the end of those guys' careers. And then for the end, because it makes no sense at all, because you just talked about the streak and him losing at WrestleMania 30, they're like, hey, we got a minute and a half left. What are we going to talk about? Let's talk about probably the most famous Undertaker match, Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 25. They didn't even really bring up the fact of, what brought the match together. They just showed some highlights and say, Undertaker won, and that was it. They just put the thing on the bottom, and they just said Undertaker's 25 years of being in the WWE, and they left. Like I said, there's some stuff in here that's good. If you got a half hour to kill and you got some things to do, like you got to type something up or look at something on the internet, and you can sort of have it on in the background and look up when you hear something they're talking about, it's going to be a good half hour. But if you're just sitting here for a half hour watching this thing, trying to be intrigued, you're going to get lost.